Marvel. What was once a low-tier comic book company in the shadow of its competitors, is now a huge pop culture juggernaut that has reached new audiences of all ages and backgrounds, primarily with its theatrical and television releases, most notably the Marvel Cinematic Universe, one of the most ambitious and successful franchises to date, having raked in billions of dollars, dethroning Star Wars as the most profitable franchise of all time, and inspiring many other studios to try and replicate the same formula Marvel has distilled into an art. Until recently, but that's another story. But many seem to forget that this wasn't always the case. Marvel wasn't always a superhero powerhouse. Back before the MCU, they were a studio who just got out of bankruptcy by selling the rights to their characters off to movie studios to keep themselves alive. And one of these ventures would eventually give rise to arguably one of the more colorful aspects of Marvel media, the animated movies. Out of all the things people do not talk about in a truly positive light, it's these. With the exception of Spider-Verse, most of these movies are generally regarded as meh to pretty bad. And while most people agree films like Hulk vs. and Planet Hulk are easily some of the best to come out of this sea of garbage, I see people mixed on which one is the worst. Some say the Invincible Iron Man, others say the Heroes United movies. But in my opinion, I say the worst of these movies is without a doubt Ultimate Avengers 2: Rise of the Black Panther. I should probably clarify, while this is not one of the worst Marvel movies ever made, this movie does sit up there in my top 3, not even movies, just worst things I've seen in general. I remember not particularly liking it as a kid, and now going back, yeah, I can safely say I like this movie even less now. And the shocking thing? Most people I see talking about this movie says it's one of the better animated Marvel movies.
Oh wait, you're serious? Let me laugh even harder.
If it isn't clear from the title of this video, I strongly disagree with them on that. So instead of going on a rant like I did with this, I'm going to break this movie down like I did with this. But this time to explain why this film does not work. I've got my critical claws sharpened, and now it's time to see why Ultimate Avengers 2: Rise of the Black Panther is an animated disaster. Before we talk about Ultimate Avengers 2, I think we should talk about the film that preceded it, Ultimate Avengers 1. It was based on the popular Marvel comic book, The Ultimates, which took place in the now defunct Ultimate Marvel canon. It told the story of Earth's mightiest heroes banding together to stop the Hulk when he seemingly goes on a rampage, only to have to work with the Jade Giant when they learn of an alien invasion coming to Earth. I never read the original comic, up until making this video for obvious reasons, but even before that, from what I understand, the movie itself is often regarded as a watered-down version of the comic book that chooses to invert the story of its source material. Instead, the movie is about Earth's mightiest heroes coming together to fight an alien invasion, but then must fight the Hulk when Banner's attempt to control his big green persona ends up backfiring. Yes, they turned one of the more important characters of the comic into a last-minute conflict. As a Hulk fan, I am not happy, but let's get back to that later. Overall, it was an okay movie. It's definitely not the 2012 film, but there are far worse choices out there. But regardless, it proved to be a financial hit, and you can bet your behind that when the producers caught whiff of the stench of sales, they quickly announced that a sequel to this film would be made. And this is where the problems start appearing. And it all starts with one simple question.
Now what?
It's good to note that the second issue of The Ultimates was not released during the production of the second film, so they had no blueprint as to where the story should go next. While I can agree with some that say that's a good thing because it means they can have more creative freedom, but when you really think about it, it becomes a bit more complicated. On one hand, it means they are not restricted to any one flowing narrative or set lore, like how Sonic SAT-AM was able to do whatever it wanted, becoming its own unique thing independent from the main Sonic series. But on the other hand, you've got stuff like the final season of Game of Thrones, where the final book wasn't released and the people making the show decided to do whatever the hell they wanted. And as a result, they didn't just make a season that effectively tarnished the brand's name, but may have even killed the franchise as a whole. True, Ultimate Avengers 2's situation definitely leans more towards the Sonic situation, but you've got to remember, when that show came out, it was one of 3 Sonic cartoons that all did their own thing. And all of that was back when the Sonic mythos was still in its infancy. That point in time was a very mixed bag of varying qualities and ideas, with the only thing remaining from this era being Sonic's love of chili dogs. That creative freedom only existed because of its unique situation. While the same couldn't be said about Ultimate Avengers 2. Sure, the follow-up comic hadn't been released yet, at the time, but they still had decades worth of comic books from other continuities with these characters they could pull from. Regardless, I think you see my point. While this may have given the writers more creative freedom, the lack of any guidelines of where to go next makes it just as likely for them to make something amazing as it did make it just as likely that they'd make something garbage. So, what story did they go with? Well, let's start at the beginning. The Chitauri, the aliens from the first movie, are back, now under the leadership of the immortal Kleiser, and the Avengers must once again unite to defeat this all too familiar threat with their new ally, the Black Panther, King of Wakanda. As the stakes are constantly rising, not only will they have to contend with the Chitauri's unkillable leader and their own internal struggles, but also the natives of Wakanda itself, who are less than pleased with outsiders butting into their affairs. Yeah, it's that kind of sequel. The villain is back once again with an all-new plan to try and get what they chased after in the first film, and the heroes must stop them all over again. Okay, I can't truly say that. I can't even say their plan is new. The Chitauri are literally using the exact same plan they had in the first movie. Full-on invasion to take over the Earth. Literally, nothing is different except they're now focusing more on Wakanda. How am I supposed to root for the heroes to succeed when they have already thwarted this exact thing once before? To put this in perspective, imagine if Kung Fu Panda 2, instead of being about Po going to stop Lord Shen and his army from conquering China while learning about his hidden past, was instead about Po having to train to stop Tai Lung all over again and struggling to beat the latter despite him figuring out the secret to beat Tai Lung prior. That sounds stupid, right? Why would he struggle against someone who he's already defeated? But to be fair, it is not an exact copy of the first movie. It's more like Toy Story 4. You can see the parallels between it and the other 3 movies prior, but you really can't say it's just a straight up repeat of any of those films. But still, I'm supposed to believe that the Avengers have become so incompetent at their job as heroes that they cannot stop the exact same things they dealt with before? The only difference is that they have an actual leader this time and they want to take over Wakanda first because of its vibranium. Okay, that's kind of understandable as it's the toughest metal known to mankind, but in the first movie, it's made clear vibranium originates from the Chitauri homeworld, so isn't that kind of redundant of them focusing on a specific country that shares the exact same resources but in less abundance?
Aye vey.
And even if it's to stop them from using their vibranium-based weapons, that shouldn't matter because they share those weapons with no one. It's literally one country of warrior tribesmen with semi-futuristic weapons versus an entire species of intergalactic space invaders. Already, that removes tension because 1. The Chitauri's plan makes no sense, and 2. Even without the Wakandans, we know the Avengers will win because these knuckleheads have already defeated them. But that's not the only thing that dipped down in quality from the first film. Let's talk about... Like I said previously, the first Ultimate Avengers was okay, but it was in a really weird place. The movie itself was considered too violent and maybe even scary for younger viewers, but it was also not mature enough for older audiences either. It was stuck in a weird limbo, being really neither for adults nor for children. So, when making the sequel, they decided to go the more mature route. And by that, I mean double down on the violence instead. Yep, it's one of those movies. The kind that desires to be edgy so bad, it fundamentally makes itself feel even less mature as a result. Its story still feels more at home in a film for younger audiences. Clearly, it's definitely something a really young child could comprehend. But there is a surprising amount of death, disintegration, psychological torment, dismemberment, all of this really violent and horrible stuff. But here's the weird thing. Despite it wanting to be dark and edgy, it surprisingly pulls its punches when it comes to character death. Yes, despite this movie being something that so desperately wants to have an edge, this movie really pulls its punches when it comes to killing its main characters off. The vast majority of character deaths are fake outs, exactly like what you'd find in most modern films. The only ones who stay dead are T'Challa's father and Hank, while the rest are, oh no, Bruce is dead. How tragic, whoops, he is still alive. Who could have seen that coming? Oh my god, Iron Man is actually dead. Thank the Lord, fools on you. Thor calls upon the power of bullshit and brings them back to life. Oh dear, Wasp is dead. How tragic, psych. She's fine, and now she's working alongside the most wretched character in the entire movie. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, I'll get to that later. But seriously, I am not kidding. This happened so much in this movie that by the time Hank actually died, I was fully waiting for the surprise reveal he was alive. But when I saw the funeral, I was like, oh, he's actually dead.
Finally! Thank you! Almost makes me want to spare your life.
It's so nauseating with how often they do this. It not only kills any suspense the final battle may have, but it also lowers the stake of the situation they're in general. And because of this, it is now my new official headcanon that it was this movie that inspired the story structure for Rise of Skywalker. For me personally, when it comes to entertainment, there is nothing I loathe more than a movie that pretends to be dark. I believe the best movies that are dark are the ones where the edge does not come from trying, but comes naturally from the story's themes, subject matter, and the way it is portrayed. My Little Goat is a great example of this. It has an edge because it portrays its cautionary warnings of the dangers of child predators and the permanent scars that their victims will have to cope with through the allegory of an actual predator going after baby goats. But whereas something like this is able to be edgy without feeling like it's forced, this does not. But the most unfortunate part about this desperate need for pseudo-edginess did come at a great price. Okay, real quick, we've got to go back to the first film. While not the greatest, it definitely had at least a few strong characters in it. Cap being the most obvious, with his journey of adapting to a new world. But it was definitely far from perfect. Right off the bat, one of the more prominent complaints that the first film gets is that both Hulk and Thor are insultingly sidelined for most of the movie in favor of the others. Which, on paper, isn't a bad idea, as you wouldn't want these two powerhouses to steal the spotlight from the rest of the team. But in the end, it does hurt the movie more. With the exception of Cap, almost none of the characters are that interesting. There's nothing to really care about with Hank and Janet's relationship. Betty is kind of a jerk to Bruce despite his good intentions. Thor is just kind of there, same with Iron Man. And the Hulk is just there to be a last-minute bad guy. So as you can tell, that's kind of a big problem. But we're not here to talk about the first movie, we're here to talk about the second. And the big question is, what does this movie do to improve on this problem?
Nothing! Absolutely nothing!
Yes, this movie doesn't just not do anything to solve this problem, it actually doubles down on it. After all, this movie decided violence and being edgy was more important, if you can even call it that. And nowhere can that be felt more than with Cap. The first movie was more so his story, primarily focusing on him adjusting to the modern world, dealing with the death of his friends and loved ones, not knowing where to go next, and making new connections with unfamiliar faces. But in the sequel, he is instead tailor-made to tie into Black Panther's story of vengeance instead, with no real goals or motivations that can stand on his own from Black Panthers. And yes, I know he and Kleiser had a scuffle in the first film, but come on, he was just there to set up the Chitauri as a threat for later on in the movie. Black Widow didn't have any real part to play outside of romantic interest to Cap. Thor is there being Thor. Euler could be removed, the Wakandan Council doesn't really have a purpose outside of being, if I am being honest, an obstacle that was easy to overcome, and don't even get me started on how they treat Banner and by default, the Hulk. Truth be told, I think the only real character that I can call interesting, and I use that in quotes, is Black Panther, as really, he is the only one with an actual character arc. He wants vengeance against Kleiser for killing his father, while protecting his kingdom who does not approve of his actions. And really, that's all it feels like. This is a Black Panther movie guest starring the Avengers. And not even a good one at that.
Congratulations, you're a failure.
But while we're on it, let's talk about one of the more glaring parts of Black Panther himself. Do you see a problem with his costume? I'll give you a few seconds. If you said everything but no sleeves, you'd be wrong. Now, why would I bring up such an odd detail? One of the most iconic parts of Black Panther is his vibranium suit, which effectively makes him invulnerable to all conventional weaponry. So tell me, who in their right minds would decide it was a good idea to just protect the legs and torso and not the arms? They do realize that leaves a specific part open for anyone to exploit, right? Hell, I don't even know if the costume is even made of vibranium. Oh, but in case it's not, don't worry, because they make up for this by giving him shape-shifting panther powers. Because that's what we love about Black Panther, right? Not his tenacious fighting prowess, resourcefulness, or cool equipment, but his ability to turn into a big furry man. And yes, I know certain Wakandans like Cold Tiger are able to do this, but I can't find anything that says T'Challa himself was able to do this. This was clearly something the writers pulled out of their collective butts just because they thought it looked cool. And yes, I thought it was stupid as a kid, and I still do now. What they did to Black Panther here would be like taking away Batman's utility belt and stealth skills and giving him the ability to turn into a human bat monster instead. Do you think that would be a logical change to the character that doesn't sound dumb? Speaking of which, this movie was advertised as the final battle.
Get ready for the final fight for survival.
It's weird how they would introduce an entirely new cast of characters just so we can never see them again once the movie is over, just adding more points of evidence for my headcanon. And yes, aside from the Avengers themselves, the movie does primarily focus on the Wakandans, and frankly, I really don't like them. I know they're protective of their kingdom and thus their vibranium, but I feel as though these Wakandans are less protecting their kingdom and more so just being ignorant assholes. I mean, seriously, they honestly thought they'd be able to hold off a planet's worth of alien invaders? I honestly think the Chitauri should have won if they're that blind to the odds. Speaking of which, just to show you how powerful these Wakandans are, they have the Avengers, Earth's mightiest heroes, insultingly made to look pathetic when compared to the Wakandans. Now, I'm not saying the Wakandans are weak, but they defeat the Avengers a lot more easily than they reasonably should. I get it, they are great warriors, but let me ask you this. Do you think a bunch of half-naked men would be able to take down Giant Man as easily as they do, let alone Tony Stark, the friggin' Iron Man? Yes, they defeat Iron Man, the one who has matched the Hulk and battled gods with nothing but sticks.
Well, that's embarrassing.
I don't think they should be able to disable Iron Man's weapons that easily. What next? They're going to finish him off with an even bigger stick? You're dead to me, movie. As I mentioned before, Thor and Hulk are sidelined in these movies pretty hard. But this raises two questions. One, why is Giant Man not sidelined like the other two? I think a skyscraper-sized scientist makes a super soldier and a spy look just as useless as these two do. And secondly, was there really no other way to have these two play a part that doesn't drag down anyone else? I'm sure there was a way to make even the weakest members look just as good as the strongest ones. I mean, look at the Avengers. No, that's too easy. I got it. Just take a look at the Snyder Cut. Superman trumps any of these characters any day, and Wonder Woman, Aquaman, and Cyborg make people like Batman and Flash look objectively useless by comparison. But instead of sidelining any of these characters, they instead give them all crucial roles to play in the final battle. Batman is the one that forms the team and leads the charge. Wonder Woman and Aquaman clear the way for Batman to get to Steppenwolf's base to enact their plan. Cyborg is the one to pull the mother boxes apart with some help. The Flash is the one who reverses time and gives Cyborg the power to tear the mother boxes apart, all the while Superman keeps Steppenwolf busy. Do you see what I mean? No character is sidelined in this movie like they are in Ultimate Avengers 2. Each and every member of the Justice League played an important role in Steppenwolf's defeat. Going back to this, really, by the end, Iron Man and Ant-Man were the only ones needed to take the Chitauri down, while the rest of the Avengers only served as support for the Wakandans. It really makes me wonder why they have to team up if they themselves only needed two individuals to stop the invasion. It's really unsatisfying to see a team based on, well, teamwork be more effective as individuals as opposed to a whole unit. Speaking of which, while I don't think he was particularly interesting in the first film, Hank is really unlikable in this movie. Like, surprisingly unlikable. He is always berating his wife over her concern for his safety, to stay out of his way, and just blames her for stuff that goes wrong despite it being out of good intention. I actually cheered for her when she stood up to him and, for all intents and purposes, dumped him. That's great, good for you. He doesn't deserve a wife like you.
And I'm done supporting you!
Supporting me? You have been holding me back.
But then, when she nearly dies, we're supposed to side with Hank in being mad at Cap for getting her nearly killed. I'm supposed to pity the guy who treated his wife like crap? But hey, at least Hank isn't the only one to become incredibly unlikable. In the first film, she was definitely not supportive of Banner or his goals, but you could kind of understand where she was coming from. In this film, Betty is not that. She is really unlikable here. I just wish I knew of a better word to describe her as. Give me a second.
Betty is still a serious bitch.
Yep, that pretty much sums her up. When it comes to Banner, she's exceptionally unpleasant towards him. All he wants to do is make up for his actions in the first film, but she always retorts by saying no one can trust him. Even when Banner himself finds the alien's weakness that could stop their invasion, she refuses to let him out to help because of those same reasons. Despite, may I remind you, being in the middle of an invasion by those same aliens. It feels less like Betty cares about Bruce, but the Hulk puts a strain on their relationship, and more like Betty never truly cared for him in the first place. Honestly, because this was my first formal introduction to Betty as a character, it's actually tainted my outlook on other versions of her. Even when it's more in line with the comic version of Betty, I still cannot look at any other version of her without thinking back to this one. And yes, just like Hank, we are supposed to feel sorry for the woman who was portrayed with little to no care for Bruce when the latter presumably dies.
Why are you the way that you are?
And yes, Banner solely exists in this movie just to suffer. Why? So the movie can be and be advertised as such. Unlike something like Feladay, where the violence actually serves to progress the story and build up the mystery, when I see Banner in that tube, all I see is a shallow, desperate attempt to shock people. It's hard to watch, I'll give them that, but not because it was earned, but because it's just sad to see my favorite Avenger wanting to make up for the stuff he did, but no one, literally no one, not even his quote-unquote girlfriend ever thinks of giving it to him, even when he begs, and instead has him be tormented by this one weed who, realistically, given his history was Banner in this universe, shouldn't even be in charge of Banner in the first place. It feels more like someone let a 12-year-old edgelord write the script than actual writers. I guess it wouldn't be as bad if it wasn't for the fact that Banner literally has no point of being in this movie. Yes, he literally spends the entire movie doing nothing but sitting around in a glass prison being psychologically tormented by this one guy who takes pleasure in making him miserable as payback for firing him and punishing him when he rightfully lashes back. He is simply there to figure out the Chitauri's weakness and nothing else. And here's the thing, with a little tweaking of the script, he could have been removed and this could have been figured out by literally any other scientist there. But don't you worry, because while Banner may not get his time to shine in the spotlight, someone clearly a lot more deserving than the guy who wants redemption gets to have that privilege. Betty! She gets to suit up. She gets a little partner to team up with. I can see the writers making this scene being all like, oh yeah, Betty's about to be a badass. While I was just sitting there like, oh god, really? I kid you not. When I saw this scene all those years ago, my heart fell into my stomach because I knew I'd never get to see my favorite Avenger get a moment to shine. And that we were supposed to be siding with Betty, the most irritating character in this movie the entire time. The main problem is that you sympathize too much with Banner, a guy who meant well but caused a lot of trouble and just wants to make up for his mistakes. This wouldn't be as painful to watch if it weren't for the fact that in the original Ultimates comic book, it was the Hulk who ended up defeating Kleiser. But no, we can't have the Hulk, probably one of the more recognizable faces in the Avengers lineup at the time, actually help with resolving the conflict. Let's just throw him to the side and turn him into Euler's torture doll so these three can be the star of the show.
What the hell were you thinking?
Speaking of which, let's talk about Dr. Euler real quick. He is a character made only for this movie and exists only to make Banner suffer. Because, well, we need this movie to be edgy, remember? And what better way to make something edgy than by having someone be psychologically tormented by an embittered coworker? But this whole subplot doesn't even need to exist. The Oiler versus Banner conflict could be removed completely and it wouldn't affect anything in the story, not even the conclusion. The most that happens is that it leads to Banner's fake death scene, which, given how these two feel nothing like a couple, never even had the chance of an emotional impact, and Oiler being killed in an honestly unsatisfying death scene. As for the Hulk himself, yeah, all the footage I am showing you now is literally his entire screen time in this movie. He is literally shafted from this entire story in every meaning of the word. But hey, that's just enough time to put him in the trailer and the advertising and call it done.
To succeed, the Black Panther must join Captain America, Thor, Iron Man, the Incredible Hulk, and all of the Avengers.
I hate it when a movie does this. Take note, aspiring writers. If the character has no real plot relevance to the story or has no real place within it, either rewrite the story, give that purpose to another character, or cut the character completely. You know what? I can't stand this movie anymore. Let's just wrap this up. While this is far from the worst Marvel movie, it is still, in my opinion, a good example as to why a lot of people don't hold the animated Marvel movies in high regard. Ultimate Avengers 2 is a movie that takes 2 steps back from a movie that already needed 1 step forward. It had no idea on how to continue the story of the Avengers. It's an insult to some of the greatest superheroes to ever live. It's desperate to be shocking, yet is too afraid to commit to it. Its whole story is just muddled and confused, and it definitely does not deserve the respect it gets, in my opinion. And I think it's movies like this that's a primary reason why no one, or at least very few people, gives the legitimately good animated Marvel movies a chance nowadays. It's even worse when you consider it's actually one of the first times a movie was made about the Avengers. Probably one of the best superhero teams with some of the best storylines ever told, and this was people's first introduction to it. But the worst part? Whenever a new animated Marvel project is made that is not made from an outside studio, you can smell the stink that movies like this left on it, as they feel very much like what this movie is. A joke. It's annoying, frustrating, derivative, superficial, needlessly cruel, and just a really miserable viewing experience. At best, it could be passed off as a follow-up to a TV pilot for a show that was never made. And at its worst, it's the kind of movie that can chase away potential newcomers from other Marvel media. I do not recommend this film to anyone, especially those who want to get into the Marvel universe. This film is the pinnacle of everything wrong with Marvel animation back then and now. I'd actually rather take Age of Ultron and The Dark World over this monstrosity any time of the year. If you want a good Avengers movie, stick to the Infinity Saga, because I can safely say it is without a doubt a true dumpster fire. Or at least until Kevin Feige finds a way of making something worse, which, given the current state of the MCU, shouldn't take too long.